at this point, I'd like to introduce you to Alicia. Are you there, Alicia? Hello, how are you doing?
Hello. Hi, Simon. How are you?
Fantastic. Nice to have you
Good
with us.
morning.
Yeah.
Thank
So,
you.
where are you, Alicia?
I am located in Portland, Maine this morning, and it is cold, but not snowing.
Well, that's good. And I did notice in the sidebar you've got some, well, maybe not friends, but you've got some close relations. There was a couple of people from Maine, one from Belfast in Maine.
Yes.
So glad to make you maybe at home for your first Food Safety Fridays webinar. So if you can get your slides ready, I'll tell the audience about the next webinar. Okay, Alicia. Right, ladies and gents. Oh, I forgot to do it, but next, I'll put it in the sidebar. The next webinar is with Robert Rogers from Metal Toledo. It's reducing waste and improving efficiencies in product inspection. That's on 16th February, a couple of weeks' time. So you can click the register now button. It'll open a new window and you can register or just react to the emails that we send over the next couple of weeks. I'll be back for the Q&A later. I'll be joining in with some polling questions, but for now, I'll hand you over to Alicia.
Hi, thanks again, Simon. Hi, everybody. My name is Alicia Swanson, and I work with AIB International, which is a third-party auditing firm. We also do food safety training. We have courses, classes. There's a baking school. If you have time, please check out our website and our link. It's amazing. Today's presentation, actually, we're going to talk about modifying your HACCP plan in order to meet FSMA compliance. So hopefully everybody here today has a good, moderate to good understanding of HACCP, and hopefully you already have a developed HACCP plan. It's not difficult. We do not need to reinvent the wheel. So again, we're going to go through a few things, a little bit of background information, and then how to transfer your already made HACCP plan into a HARP-C plan or a food safety plan. All right, so by the end of today, we're going to talk about some factors that actually contributed to this Food Safety Modernization Act, the 5 key elements to it. So Food Safety Modernization Act, here on out, I'm going to call it FSMA, okay? It's just a lot easier, and FSMA, that's what we're calling it. So the 5 key elements to FSMA. We'll talk about why we have preventive controls for human food regulation put into play underneath the FSMA Act. We're going to understand the scope and the intent of the food safety plan and hopefully follow a roadmap for a successful transition from your HACCP plan to a food safety plan. And there might be a few other FSMA rules and regulations that impact food safety, and we will briefly go over those at the end. Okay, so just take a second and think about it. What factors, what played a role? What do you guys think contributed to the overhauling of the food safety regulations in the United States? Okay, because FSMA has been is a sweeping change in over 70 years to food safety. So what pushed that? You know, what contributed to having those rules overhauled? Well, let's take a look at some numbers. Okay, 31 known pathogens versus unspecified agents. What's important here? Take a look at this last column, the numbers. These numbers are extremely high. All right, we've got 9.4 million people, estimated illnesses from those 31 known pathogens, that's 20%. Okay, 55,000, some are hospitalized, and deaths, 1,300 deaths, just for those known pathogens. Don't forget some of those known pathogens are also, those do include like salmonella, listeria, E. coli, Listeria monocytogenes. And then we have those unspecified agents. Well, what does that mean, right? Unspecified agents, That leaves a lot of room for improvement. Take a look at the number, 56%, okay, for unspecified agents. These are big numbers, okay? These are food safety failures in the industry. All right. What is the number one reason for FDA food recalls? I believe, Simon, this was a polling question.
Yeah. Well, it's not a voting question. Just type in the sidebar what you think the number one reason for FDA product recalls is.
Okay, so my mistake there. I already gave you the answer. All righty, sorry about that. Okay.
Right, so it's allergens followed by salmonella. Okay.
Yes, so the number one reason for FDA product recalls is allergens. And the second reason is salmonella. So we'll see this on the chart over here if you guys can see this, okay? So the blue, undeclared allergens, number one reason for FDA product recalls. Salmonella being the second in the red, and the green, we have Listeria monocytogenes. And then we've got some others down here too. A lot of them fall under chemical hazards as well. We've got pathogenic E. coli, which is a biological hazard. We've got other. Okay, that always bothers me. Foreign objects. Let's take a look at that real quick, because we're going to be talking about this when we talk about our food safety plan and how we're going to transition it from HACCP. A lot of our HACCP hazard analyses are focused around foreign physical objects. Well, but look at how many recalls we've had, less than 1%. Okay, and then this is from the annual reportable food registry from 2013. So I'm sure these numbers are a little bit older. Okay, but what does that tell you guys? Does it say that we have control? We've got a pretty good hold of foreign physical objects in our product? Yeah. I'd say so if the recalls are less than 1%. So HACCP has helped us with that. Now we have to start focusing, not now, but we need to start also focusing on the other potential hazards that we have, or known and reasonably foreseeable hazards that are definitely, that can affect food safety in our product. So HACCP has helped definitely control that physical hazard, and we're going to work on those other ones. Oops, next. Again, some contributing factors. Okay, so FSMA, food safety modernization, got passed. That's from consumers. There was a lot of consumer pressure put on Congress. All right, so look, again, we're going to take a look at some numbers. 89% of Americans said that they supported a more aggressive food safety and defense regulation. All right, so that's the FDA. 61% of Americans supported FSMA, strongly supported this sweeping modernization act. 94% of these companies agree that they should be mandated. 94% of Americans agree that companies should be mandated to show traceability back to its original source. For those of you that are in the food industry, you're probably already doing these things, maybe for an audit scheme that you might have, or maybe you're doing it for custom requirements. So now all we're saying is that under FSMA, it's the consumers that said, we want to see all this stuff happening in those food companies. So they now want to see traceability. Can you trace your product? Can you trace it even back to overseas, potentially? And we're going to talk about one of those too. It's called the Foreign Supplier Verification Program. So it's another element under FSMA. All right, 91% agree that the FDA should inspect food facilities at least every 6 to 12 months. Okay, could you imagine the government showing up to your food factory every 6 to 12 months? That is a lot. You already probably get a ton of inspections and audits, and now the government's going to start coming in that often. That'd be nice. Would be a perfect world, but it can't happen. Okay, it's just not there yet. to have those inspections, but they do have a timeline for inspections, and it's based on what kind of product you make, high risk versus low risk. That will depend on how often you get an FDA inspection. There are some other outlining factors to keep in mind based on FDA inspections. If you have had a recall, if you are having, problems in your facility, that may spark more FDA inspections. All right, 92% of the consumers felt that companies should be testing for contamination and that they should report those results to the government. So that would go back to the listeria and the salmonella, those biological hazards potentially. Consumers feel that companies should report those findings to the government. And in some cases, it is a requirement to report those positive findings. All right, so there's a little bit of background why FSMA came into play. It's not going anywhere. If anything, it's here to help us. We want to have strong food safety laws. We want to protect consumers. And not only that, we're also going to talk about all of that food that we get from overseas. And that takes a play within the FSMA too. So the 5 key elements here that we really want to focus on is prevention. That's the name of the game, okay? Prevention, prevention, prevention. Sorry, I was smacking my hands. I'm sure you guys heard that. Prevent this stuff from even happening, okay? If you prevent it, you don't have to worry about it. So the name of the FSMA game is prevention, okay? And part of that also, inspections and compliance. What about the response time? How are we responding to food safety risks? That is a key element to FSMA. Who are we notifying? How are we notifying these consumers or the government or whoever needs to know about it, possibly other manufacturing customers? So what kind of response time do we have? Taking imports now into consideration. That is another key element to FSMA. And also, understanding that we need to have enhanced relationships, not just with the government, but with our customers, with other countries that want to supply food and other ingredients to the United States. We're really going to help them. There are a lot of countries out there that don't have food safety regulations the way that North America does right now, or even maybe some of those other countries. We'll talk about those. So the enhanced partnership is working with them and get them to raise their food safety standards to match what the FDA has put in place, which is now the FSMA. All right, so again, the focus switched from reaction to prevention under FSMA. Okay, reaction, that's, we had a recall, right? So now that's our customer complaint. These are reactions. Somebody got sick, somebody got injured from eating my product. I now have to react. I'm reacting by having a recall. Okay, a voluntary recall or could have been involuntary. So again, FSMA is focusing from taking the focus off of that reacting to preventing. Let's not even have the hazards to begin with. Again, FSMA is the most significant change to U.S. food laws since 1938. I think that's 74, 75 years, okay, that they've done this. So it was a long time coming, all right? One of the laws, 402A3, is one of the changes. It reflects past, where product was considered adulterated after the failure had already occurred. Okay, so the definition of 402A3, and don't forget, you can always find definitions on the FDA website. Okay, 402A3, a food shall be deemed to be adulterated if it consists in whole or in part of any filthy, putrid, or decomposed substances, or if it's otherwise unfit for food. Okay, so the failure has already occurred. It's too late. You can't eat it. It's adulterated. It's contaminated. it's no good. However, they changed it. Now it's 402A4. All right, this is the future. Okay, the emphasis is on the prevention by managing your sanitary conditions. So it's now reason to believe 402A4 definition is a food shall be deemed adulterated if it has been prepared, packed, or held. So held, warehouses, this may apply to you also, whereby unsanitary conditions, under unsanitary conditions whereby it may have become contaminated or whereby it may have been rendered injurious to health. Okay, so that means reason to believe. All right, 402A3, we had to see that credible evidence. Pardon my example, you had to see the cockroach in the yogurt to say, okay, you got cockroaches, right? You had to see the adulteration, the filth, the putridness, the decomposition. Now we have reason to believe. That's 402A4. So maybe we don't see the cockroaches in the yogurt, but we're seeing evidence of cockroaches somewhere in the facility. Does the government have reason to believe that there is cockroaches or contamination in your yogurt? A little bit more likely now. So that's a big difference between having that credible evidence and calling something adulterated and seeing it adulterated versus reason to believe that it's adulterated. So again, it comes down to focusing on keeping sanitary conditions and really having strong GMPs, good manufacturing practices. So, all right. Again, we're going over the 5 key elements of FSMA. One of them is inspections, compliance, and response. 402A3, remember, adulteration if it was determined by credible and verifiable evidence. They had to see the adulteration. Now it's just reason to believe, okay, that they can come into your facility. If it's unclean, they're finding dirty floors, walls, and ceilings, they would have reason to believe that your food contact surfaces are dirty if your floors, walls, and ceilings are dirty. And they're going to start looking at that stuff. And they're going to start looking at records now too. So again, the FDA's focus is on preventive measures and then proving it. So a lot of places are doing these things. They say they're doing them and they're doing them, but where's the proof? So documentation and records, you have to prove it. You have to write it down or it didn't happen. Okay, there are major implications for food safety programs and FDA inspections. FSMA gave the FDA more power, so to speak. Okay, a little bit stronger teeth to really, put the hammer down on food factories that are not producing in a safe environment. So there's more implications now that can happen to you. It's not just going to be, a 483 violation notice. That's how it starts. They're going to start writing warning letters. Warning letters is if you don't fix these, we're going to shut you down. And they have the authority now to do these things. They can also come in and take swabs of your facility. All right, if you're a ready-to-eat facility and they have reason to believe you have unsanitary conditions, they might start coming in and swabbing for pathogens. So there are the implications now of having an ineffective food safety plan are much, much larger than they used to be. And if you think about it for a minute, the proof of that would be in what happened with the peanut factory that had a recall back in 2009, where there was an investigation that happened, there was a lawsuit that happened, and people are literally sitting in jail, okay, because people died and got sick from eating tainted peanut butter. So it's borderline criminal now. Another key element is imports. All right, we need so many countries, over 120 countries provide food and ingredients to the United States. That's over 300,000 facilities. That is a lot. And many of those countries have very weak food safety laws. Okay, there are 3 countries right now that have food safety laws that are equivalent to us, but most of them don't. right? So now it's up to the importer. It's up to you guys. If you're receiving exported product, the importer is now responsible for food safety and ensuring the sanitary conditions in the exporter's facilities. So that's part of FSMA. How do you plan on checking your suppliers that are overseas? Okay, that's another program under FSMA. Again, it's called the Foreign Supplier Verification Program. Enhanced partnerships is a key element of FSMA. Again, FSMA acknowledges and totally recognizes that we get a lot of food and ingredients from overseas. So the FDA is opening up foreign offices. They're establishing liaisons, and they're working with other countries. They're trying to educate right now, not so much regulate, because other countries with those weak food safety systems, they have a much farther climb to go than we do, or some of the other countries that are recognized already, which, by the way, those 3 countries that are recognized are Canada, New Zealand, and Australia. Okay, so those are the countries that currently have equivalent food safety programs that match FDA and FSMA. Okay, so again, we are working with other countries to increase their food safety rules and show them and help them how to get things to match our requirements, so that we can continue to accept product from overseas. Okay. The preventive controls for human food rule. So basically, CFR, we all should be following, if we are producing food, we should be following 21 CFR. And it used to be part 110. Okay, except now it's 21 CFR part 117. So FDA.gov, you guys can find this stuff on the internet. It's free, it's available. You just have to go out there and you read it. Part 117 is what helps break down and identify the new rules that we have to put in place, what the new changes were under FSMA. Okay, there's subpart A, which are just general provisions. Subpart B is about current good manufacturing practices. These are the rules of under FSMA. Part C is the hazard analysis and risk-based preventive controls. So that's HACCP. Sounds extremely similar to HACCP because it is extremely similar. All right, HACCP is a hazard analysis of critical control points. This is a hazard analysis based on risk. And if you have hazards, you'll put in preventive controls. So again, it's just another term, okay? But the intent is the same as HACCP, and you're using the same basic 7 principles of HACCP and Codex to apply this. Subpart D will explain modified requirements. So who has to comply with FSMA? Some of us don't have to. Some of us have to just parts of it. Warehouses, I suggest read subpart D and determine if you fall under modified requirements. Subpart E is a withdrawal of qualified facility exemption. If you feel that you should be exempt from FSMA regulations, go ahead and look at subpart E, because you may think you're exempt. The government may say, okay, here's what you're going to have to do to prove that to us. So subpart E would be taking a look at if you were exempt, or if you're trying to get exemption, and what would constitute if not being exempt anymore from FSMA regulations, part of them. Everybody still has to do good manufacturing practices. Most of this has to do with the hazard analysis of risk, the HACCP program section part of it. Excuse me. Subpart F is requirements for applying to records. So again, we have to keep records. Well, here's one of the good things. The government does recognize that a lot of us are going electronic. So there is a section that outlines some rules and some rules and tips for how to maintain electronic records also. So that might include password protecting, having firewall protection, having your programs backed up in the event you lose power or something goes wrong. So they do recognize that. And then we have subpart G, supply chain program. So if we have identified hazards, hazards that are going to cause illness or injury, and our supplier is controlling that hazard, then we might want to take a look at a supply chain program and potentially putting in a supply chain preventive control. We're going to talk about those too. So in part 117 of the 21 CFR is where you can find all of the information regarding FSMA. So at this point, so that was a little bit of background, okay, of FSMA, why we have to do it. We're killing a lot of people. We have a lot of illnesses out there. People are getting sick, injured, deaths because of poor food manufacturing. So if you already have, so that's the background. The rest of this presentation is going to talk about, hopefully you already have a HACCP plan. So how can we change our HACCP plan and have it be modified to meet FSMA requirements? It's not going to be that difficult, actually. If you have a strong HACCP plan already, then you're halfway there, okay? You've already done your homework. So again, it's got a lot of different terms. It can be called the preventive controls for human food term. And I say human foods because there is one coming out for animal foods also. Hazard analysis of risk-based preventive controls for animal food. So HACCP plans, food safety plans, HARP-C, preventive controls for human foods. It's about meeting the intent. Okay, are you meeting the intent of a food safety plan? Are you documenting how you're going to produce safe food? Can you prove it by putting in some preventive controls to protect it and then documenting it all down? Of course, there's more factors, but that's basically what it is. Okay, can you prove it? Are you meeting the intent? The written hazard analysis is the minimum requirement. That's the minimum. But there are going to be other pieces that are going to be extremely helpful that you may want to include in your food safety plan. But at a very minimum, you have to have that hazard analysis, regardless of the outcome. So if you have done your hazard analysis and you determined you do not have any SECODA hazards or serious hazards that will cause serious adverse health consequences or death to humans and animals, so illness or injury. If you don't have any hazards, you still have to have the hazard analysis. That's fine that you recognize that you don't have any preventive controls, but again, you still have to have that piece. So if you go back when we were in high school and we were in math class and the teacher says in math, you have to show your work. You can't just turn in your homework with the answer. You have to show how you got to that answer. A lot of this is showing your work. So you can give them the answer, here are the preventive controls, or here we have no hazards, or here we do. But again, showing them how you got there is an important piece as well to consider. All right, if we do have identified a preventive control on that hazard analysis, we identified a hazard that we need to control within our process, then we're going to do all of the pieces that come along with it. If you have a HACCP plan now, you might already have identified CCPs. So it's just terminology. CCP is a critical control point. A PC is a preventive control. So preventive control, same thing. The intent is we're trying to reduce or eliminate that hazard to the finished product. You have to validate those. You have to have monitoring procedures. We're going to go over these. Again, if you have already identified CCPs, that's great. You've already done half the work. It does say that your process PCs must be validated. If you have a metal detector, some of you might call your metal detector a CCP now. You can still leave it as a CCP. Just understand the terminology of FSMA. That's called a process preventive control, a PPC. Okay, so your metal detector is the same. You have The implementation records, that's all of those documents that match that metal detector. When you test it every hour or maybe every half hour, you're documenting that you tested it, that you verified it. Maybe quality comes along once a week and then checks to make sure that the verification of the metal detector was done properly. That's a verification. Once a year, we validate that the metal detector is working. All of those documents are called implementation records. And so those are now a requirement if you have identified a preventive control. So it's no different than having all of those CCP records if you identified a critical control point. They're just called implementation records now. You might also hear them being called management components. Okay. So in your food safety plan, the box on the left is what is required. Okay, so you have to have it. The box on the right is what's useful. And if you have a good understanding of HACCP, you'll take a look and you'll say, oh, all of these things under the useful box were required for HACCP. So again, if you already have it, that's excellent. You did have the work already. So your hazard analysis is a must. That is a must. You must have it in there, regardless of if you have identified hazards or not. So now you do that hazard analysis. For HACCP, it was only 3 hazards that we had to look at: biological, chemical, and physical. So keep that hazard analysis. Now we're just going to add 2 more: radiological and EMA hazards, which is economically motivated adulteration that affects food safety. So the best example that I can come up with for one of those types of hazards, if you guys remember, there was a recall in our food industry a couple years ago with a spice, and it was the cumin or cumin, wherever you are in the States is how you pronounce it. So the cumin, it was cut. Not only was it cut with filler, that filler was peanut shells. Okay, so they were trying to cut the spice, so they were trying to they had economic motivation there, cut the cost, but food safety risk happened because they were using peanut shells, which is an allergen, or peanut dust, and so it affected food safety. So take a look at your raw materials. Do you have ingredients that can be economically motivated for adulteration that affects food safety? And these are the 2 that have to be added to your hazard analysis for your food safety plan versus the one that you had for your HACCP plan. So you keep the same format if you like, just add 2 more. Okay, you've done your hazard analysis, you take a look, you do have some hazards you've determined. Are you going to control those hazards? If yes, they're preventive controls. So now it's required that you have a preventive control to control the hazard that you previously identified. That might be a process preventive control, like a metal detector or an oven where you have cooking temperatures. It's allergens. If you're producing with allergens, then you most likely will have a food allergen preventive control. How do you prevent cross contact of that allergen? Okay, sanitation is another preventive control. Supply chain is a preventive control, and there may be others that you have identified. All right, these are required. Now you have your hazard analysis, you identified a hazard, you put in a preventive control. If you have that, you must have a recall plan. You have identified hazards, you must have a recall plan. It's a requirement. Chances are you already have one, all right, for customer requirements or other auditing scheme requirements. Now it's just not a recommendation from the government anymore. It's just now a requirement. So take a look at your recall plan. Take a look at the recall plan requirements in the 21 CFR, and you might have to make some minor changes and some minor tweaks to your recall plan, but hopefully you already have one established. So that's now required if you have identified hazards and you put preventive controls for them. Not only that, but the last piece that's required is the procedures for monitoring that preventive control, the corrective actions if the critical limits that we set are not met. Okay, if they are out of whack or if we don't meet those critical limits, what are the documented corrective actions? There should be documented procedures for verifying the preventive control and including validation. All of these are around your preventive controls. This is what's required in your food safety plan. Again, if you have a HACCP plan, you already have this stuff. So what can be useful? So the government might say, we might need, the FDA might say, it might be helpful to give me a little bit of the overview of your facility. What kind of products do you guys produce? That might be helpful. The food safety team, that's going to be helpful because one of the new requirements is that we have a PCQI, a preventive control qualified individual. So food safety team, showing the food safety team might satisfy the requirement of having preventive control qualified individual on the team. All right, a product description, this is your finished product profile. There's a lot of information on that that can help determine if you have the proper hazard analysis and the proper preventive controls in place. You've got your flow diagram, definitely a requirement in HACCP, and then you have your process description. These can all be useful for your food safety plan, but they're not required. It's what's in the box on the left that's required. Again, don't reinvent the wheel. Don't throw out anything. Keep this stuff because it's your work. It's how you got to where you are now. So keep that stuff. It's you put a lot of time and effort into it, chances are. So what, you wouldn't want to throw it out anyway. All right, so taking that HACCP plan and turning it into a food safety plan, those of you that are already PCQIs, chances are you took a class, okay? Don't forget FDA investigators, they are taking the same class that you are. So if it's like, it's talk their language. When you talk their language, it just makes things go a lot easier. So it's important to know key definitions, okay? Because they've changed some of the terms, they've added some new terms. So go into the 21 CFR and go find those definitions. Definitions are part of subpart A, general provisions. Okay, so some of them are known, reasonably foreseeable hazards. These are definitions that are riddled throughout FSMA requirements. Those are the hazards that your hazard analysis is trying to determine if you have. And don't forget, you've got that risk assessment chart, hopefully, the likelihood, severity versus probability. Okay, so known, reasonably foreseeable hazards, they're there. Okay, we know that they're there. Liquid egg, salmonella, right? It's known raw eggs are known to have salmonella. Is it reasonable to expect raw eggs to have salmonella? Absolutely. We're going to look for salmonella on that hazard analysis. Hazards that require a preventive control it's another term. Did you identify a hazard that's going to cause illness or injury? So do you have to put in a preventive control for that hazard? So I have liquid eggs. I'm going to add the liquid eggs to my cookies. What would be my preventive control? What would be my process step to control that salmonella hazard? In which case it might be cooking my ovens. I need to make sure that I cook the cookies to a proper temperature to ensure that the salmonella, my known hazard, is under control. And then we have the preventive controls, which is that process step. The process step within your process that will be controlling that hazard. If it's a physical hazard, then it would be potentially a metal detector, preventive control. A biological hazard might be a fryer or an oven, some kind of kill step. Pasteurization is another one. These are just examples. Okay, ready-to-eat foods and environmental pathogens. These are definitions important to know. Ready-to-eat foods. Is there going to be further processing or further instructions for a consumer before they start eating your product? Okay, if there's no further processing required down the line, then your product might be ready to eat. When you have ready to eat foods, and especially foods like the cookies, we're sticking with these cookies. I have my salmonella, I cooked them, I controlled the hazard, but I can eat my cookie as a ready to eat food. Now I have to package that cookie, so environmental pathogens now affect me in my ready-to-eat food plant. So if my cookie is exposed to the environment, because it's ready to eat, it's okay to eat my cookie. I'm just packaging it. I have to have an environmental pathogen monitoring program in my facility. Okay, so ready-to-eat foods, determine if your product is considered ready to eat. If it's a ready-to-eat food that is expired, that is exposed to the environment prior to packaging, then you will have environmental pathogens, in which case you'll have an environmental pathogen monitoring program. Allergen cross-contact, again, these are just definitions, okay, guys? Allergen cross-contact, if it has to do with allergens, it is called cross-contact. If it has to do with anything else, it's cross-contamination. Okay, so allergen cross-contact, everything else cross-contamination. There are corrections and corrective actions. Know the definitions between the two of them. Corrective actions are procedures put in place when there's a preventive control that is outside of its critical limits. And then a correction is immediate fix. And there was potentially no product or no food contact surfaces affected. So what we're saying here is know your definitions. I'm starting to speed up a little bit because I'm managing my time. So you already have, so know your definitions, okay? That helps with your HACCP plan to a food safety plan. Make sure that you're also meeting the new training and education requirements under FSMA. So there are qualified individual requirements now. Qualified individuals are the employees that are actually performing the assigned duty of that preventive control. The employee that's checking the oven temperature or potentially the product temperature. The employee doing the metal detector check. Okay, these are qualified individuals, floor operators that do the monitoring. These could be supervisors. Okay, there needs to be detailed training and education on file as a requirement in your food safety plan. So put some stuff, some training decks in your food safety plan to show that they're qualified individuals, that you did do the training. Supervisors will be called qualified individuals. They need to make sure that they can train the people also, and can they follow corrective actions procedures if the preventive control gets out of set limits. And then you have the preventive control qualified individual. That's the PCQI. That is a requirement, somebody who has taken an FDA curriculum course or can otherwise explain through education and experience. And then there are qualified auditors that we must now have. So if you've got all these people on your HACCP team, great, you're already there. Oh, FDA guidance documents. Let me tell you something about these FDA guidance documents real quick, you guys. The taxpayers paid for these, okay? We paid for these, so we should use them. The government spent a lot of time and a lot of money putting together these guidance documents. It's what they say if we follow these documents, we should not go wrong, okay? Put it back on them. What scientific information did you use to conduct your food safety plan and implement this and put it together? Oh, I used the FDA food guidance document for preventive controls for human food. Great. They love to hear that. So we spent a lot of money on these. Use them, okay? They love that we are using their product. The 5 preliminary steps from HACCP. Again, if you already have a HACCP plan, you're halfway there. In HACCP, you have the team. For HARP-C or your preventive control rules, you'd have the team plus now a PCQI. For HACCP, you had to describe the product. For HARP-C, you have a product description. What is it that you make? Identify the intended use of the product. Same thing, intended and unintended use. So how can the consumer misuse your product? How are you going to identify that? And a lot of the times it's with labeling. All right. HACCP, we had to construct the flow diagram. For preventive controls, we have to have a process flow diagram. Verify the process flow diagram on the floor, and then you verify it on the floor. And there are other process step descriptions within your plan. Again, useful information, but they're going to ask for it, so you should have it. It helps prove that what you did works. Okay, the 7 principles, the hazard analysis, that is the one requirement. If you do determine that you have hazards, you will put in a preventive control, much like a CCP. If you've already did it, that's great. You're just going to call it a process preventive control. You could still call it a CCP. You're meeting the intent. Set critical limits. Okay, you're going to have monitoring. All that's the same. If you have those critical limits, you put in corrective actions. The difference here is that we might be able to have corrections as well as corrective actions. Corrections that would happen during a pre-op inspection, before startup. Oh, that's unclean. We have to re-clean it. That's a correction. All right, but still has to be documented. Verification, still need that for both. Chances are you're already doing it. Are you verifying that the temperatures are being met, that the metal detector is detecting the test pieces? You do have to validate your CCPs and HACCP. You have to validate your process PCs. It's the same. And records. Okay, so again, it really doesn't need to be that difficult if you already have a working HACCP plan. It's just making the minor tweaks, adding the terminology, using the language that they want, okay, just to make it easier. Records, you have to have the written food safety plan. Written, it's okay if it's electronic, okay? But the point is that you have to have it documented and it needs to be on site. If you have a corporate office should not have your food safety plan. They can have a copy of it, but it needs to be on site. You must maintain your records, your food safety records for 2 years. Not really different from HACCP. I believe HACCP usually says 3 years. Not much different. Okay, and records have to be made available to the FDA upon request. FSMA changed this to oral or written request. So keep in mind, if they ask for a document, it can be an oral request as well. They have to be made available. And it's within 24 hours too, if not sooner, as soon as possible, okay? And a reanalysis of your food safety plan is every 3 years now, instead of once a year, or of course when there's significant changes that occur, new products, new processes, potentially if you had a failure, you might need to reanalyze your plan to figure out how did that failure occur. Okay, and then really, really quickly, are there other FSMA rules that can impact food safety? Absolutely. We've got Sanitary Transportation Act, which ensures that refrigerated foods are staying refrigerated throughout the transportation process, that there is sanitation going on between loads of bulk tankers. Usually this is wash tickets. Again, a lot of this stuff we are already doing. It's just now not a recommendation. It's just now a requirement. All right, protection during transportation, a little bit of food defense. Specifications and operational requirements for shippers, loaders, carriers, and receivers. All of this stuff is outlined in other presentations for sanitary transportation. Unless you find a hazard that you need to put in a preventive control, this really will not go into your food safety plan, but it might if you determine that you have a preventive control here, okay? And again, you're gonna have to have written agreements potentially with some of your suppliers as well, and records. Always keeping records now. The human food, the byproducts, there's a section here. If it's held and shipped, if it comes off the line and we're going to send it to the pig farmer, it's got to be treated like human food now. So take a look at your processes. Are you guys sending stuff for animal food and feed? And is that clean food? Is that safe food also? Okay, you might need to apply a preventive control rule. And if you're making animal food, that rule passed too, by the way. Very, very, very similar. You just don't have to worry about allergens as much, but most of them are the same. You've got that foreign supplier verification program. Again, this helps us ensure that imported food is as safe as the food that's produced here, and it helps prevent potentially adulterated food products. FDA is working with countries, is working on the border. We're doing the best we can. What are you guys doing? Start planning now. How are you going to handle your foreign suppliers? Okay, who is the direct importer? Is it going to go to, who's the receiving facility? Does it go to a warehouse first and then you guys get it? Take a look at where your supplies are coming from and do a deeper dive to see if you need to have a foreign supplier verification program. There might need to be a preventive control involved potentially. Mitigation strategies are now a requirement. So basically this is food defense, okay? You have to have a written food defense plan now with a vulnerability assessment, which is very similar to a hazard analysis. Where are you vulnerable? It's going to have some key activity types. Did you identify any vulnerable areas, and did you put in mitigation strategies? So almost like, did you put in preventive controls if you identified a vulnerable, area? So for example, if you were not sealing your tanker trucks, that might be a vulnerable area, and you might want to put in a strategy where you start sealing with numbered seals, your tanker trucks. Okay, so remember, there's more to it than in FSMA, but for now, it should be a very, very easy transition to have a HACCP plan and turn it into a food safety plan. It does not need to be difficult. Okay, Simon, at this time, I think we can take questions.
Yes, fantastic. Good job, Alicia. You can stop sharing the slides now. Well, you've broken a record today. AIB and Alicia Swanson, 632 people online. That's a record. Right, so let's not waste any time. Let's pick up some questions if we can. Premal asked earlier, which was a good question. How can a manufacturer, let me just highlight it. How can a manufacturer predict, catch all possible misuse of their products by consumers? I mean, there's all manner of things,
Yes, you're not going to be able to catch all everything, but you definitely want to be able to identify that misuse that's going to cause them illness or injury. Best example I can come up with is raw cookie dough. Okay, you're supposed to cook it. Labels say cook to an internal temperature of this, and the labels also say do not eat raw. So these are some of those ways. What's the hazard that might make them ill or sick or injured?
Okay. The reference that you gave on the slide, somebody said they typed it in, for the guidelines, and they said it didn't work, but maybe they mistyped it. We'll just double check that before we send these slides out. Okay, any questions? Samuel, when is the FSMA enforcing? When is FSMA enforcing the produce rule in the US?
The produce rule can be found on the FSMA timeline. I don't have that pulled up. I believe that's September 17 or 18. It's probably a Monday. Okay. But the produce rules are coming into effect quite soon. It also depends on the size of your facility. Go to the FDA.gov website and Google, or you can even Google FSMA timeline, and all of the timelines on who has to comply by what date will be on there.
Okay. Marisol, do you have any examples of food fraud at a fruit and vegetable packing and growing facility? We are needing to do this for global gap audit. I don't know where to start. Any ideas? Food fraud at a fruit and vegetable? Is it high risk?
So food fraud is just a little bit different than the economically motivated adulteration for food safety. Okay, so if your fruits and vegetables can be mislabeled or mispackaged and can cause food safety concerns, wow, I can't think of any in the food industry. That's a tough. That's a good one. In the fruit and vegetable industry, food fraud is typically, labeling organic, GMO, these kinds of things. Country of origin, if you're not stating the correct country of origin, that can be an issue.
Okay, I had a little outage then. I don't know if you noticed. I've had a few while you've been presenting. Okay, no worries. Rosemary, what rules do brokers have to follow pertaining to FSVP?
Yeah, the Foreign Supplier Verification Program. Brokers, you start having conversations, okay? Because somebody's going to have to start being held accountable and responsible for those foods coming to the border. Start having the conversation out. But again, there are many, many, many other presentations, I'm sure, on foreign supplier verification, and those will go into details on how you can handle that with your broker.
Yeah, I think we've actually got some. We might put a link in the follow-up. Here, the course FSPCA for Human Foods uses FSPC more than HACCP. What is your opinion? Does that make sense to you? I'm trying to highlight that.
Okay. Are you just talking about the term itself? The FSPCA course uses food safety preventive controls more than HACCP. If we're just talking terminology, it's the same. It really is. It's just meeting the intent. I still call it a HACCP plan by mistake. 20-something years in the business, we still call it a HACCP plan. It's a food safety plan. If you call it HACCP food safety plan, I don't really think the term matters. It's that you're meeting the intent, that you have a documented plan on how you're going to produce safe food. That's what's important.
So would you recommend using terminology as per FSMA, or that's recognised sort of traditionally GFSI, HACCP? Because somebody said earlier it can be confusing for staff when you using different terminology that means the same thing essentially.
It is a best practice. It will behoove you to start learning the FSMA definitions and use those words. That's what the government's using. You can, it's just start making the transition now. I really think you're going to be better off using FSMA terms.
Okay. Shala, where can we find the guidance that says Canada is exempt from FSMA compliance?
I don't think you're going to find that exactly. I don't think they're exempt, especially if they're exporting to the States. But there is a document on CFIA website. Maybe not a document, but it's on the CFIA website, which is the Canadian version of FDA. And that says here are that your plan most likely matches food safety plans of the FDA. So you might just have to tweak it, add radiological hazards if you hadn't already done that. But look to CFIA for that.
Yeah. A couple of people asked as well, specifically about FSSC, which is one of the 22,000, which is one of the GFSI, very comprehensive standard. Is it mostly just about terminology then and structure rather than the things that you're addressing? Yeah.
Yes.
Right.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. Again, you have your foundation, which is Codex, the 7 principles. FSSC is based on that, just like many other GFSI schemes. You're meeting the intent. Again, FSS, it's not a big difference. But just know that.
It's just knowing where everything matches up, isn't it, I guess?
Yes.
Which you've done today, obviously, with
a little bit.
Yeah. Okay. Paul, a comment from Paul. A client just said their first inspection under FSMA was told he had too many CCPs. When questioned, he was told, call them PCPs and he would be fine.
Okay. If that was his biggest problem because he called it the wrong thing, great, right?
Yeah.
If that's his biggest problem. Again, I have not had the experience where they're coming in saying that you have too many, maybe not enough. But if he just wants you to call it something different, just appease that investigator and call him something different. I don't think that would result in any kind of 483 violation, which is a government violation.
Okay.
I think you're
right.
Okay.
Any more questions before we have to end? Sarah, nope. Lots of thank yous. Right, what's this, Samuel? It's quite a long question. Having trouble finding information on water sampling. What is the distance each sampling site should be at in farming? Wow, that's quite specific. Have you any idea? It's not really related to physics.
Yeah, you're going to find water sampling procedures because it looks like we've got some stuff in here regarding farming. That's all going to go under the produce rule. If we're talking about water samples within your production facility, then you take the sample at the point of use. So if you're filling a hopper with water, that comes right out of the ceiling, out of a spigot. That's your source, and that's where you'll pull your water sample. There are specific sampling programs under the produce rule. I will tell you, I am not familiar with those just yet. So I don't know, but I know they have them.
Okay. Right. Let's see. We're up to the hour mark. Example, last one then, last question, Cecilia. Can you give an example of verification versus validation and the documents required for each?
Okay, documents are similar. Okay, verification. Are you doing what you say you're doing? Okay, that's it. You say you're going to check the temperature every 4 hours. Are you doing it? Okay, and the validation, is that effective? Is that temperature that you're checking and verifying every 4 hours, is that an effective temperature to kill the pathogen that you have identified? So verification records could be something as simple as temperature monitoring, and a validation record might be something from a third party where you bring somebody in to calibrate your ovens and there's a report. So it's documentation you have to have on file. What it looks like, that's not important. It's just that it has the information. Is my process effective? That's my validation. And my verification, am I doing what I say I'm doing? I hope that answered your question.
Yes, it did. Perfect. Right. Look at that comment I've highlighted there.
I saw that. Thank you.
There you go. Right.
Oh, so Kimberly, thank you.
So you've broke a record. You've got lots of great feedback. You've imparted. It's a very important topic, and a lot of people want to know, how do I transition? How do I make the jump? And so, yeah, I think you've done that fantastically in an hour. So thanks very much, Alicia. Enjoy the rest of your day and enjoy your weekend. Okay.
Okay. Thanks, Simon. You too.
Right, ladies and gents, that was Alicia Swanson from AIB. Great presentation. I've issued the certificate in the sidebar. We will follow up with an email with the recording slides and the certificate, and we'll check those links out for you and put those in. Happy Friday, best day of the week. Enjoy the rest of your day. Have a great weekend, and we'll see you on the next webinar. Take care. Bye.